Whoever said life in the SEC was going to be easy? Welcome to Ole Miss Rebels Live right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you stopping by. Pull up a chair, spend 60 with us. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. Keep in mind that we are simulcasting on the main channel, but we've got an Ole Miss channel. We have dropped the link in the chat, so we would love for you to join us on the Ole Miss channel and check
And
out
lots of
everything we've got
surprises
in store
coming.
there.
Yeah, lots of
Yes,
surprises coming. Yeah.
absolutely. And we've got no channel, we've got no show without Leanne Herring here from the Rebel Walk. Leanne, thank you so much, as always, for
Always
being
a
here.
pleasure, Mark. Always a pleasure, Mark. I wish that there was a lot more highlights. The Cats came to town. Mark Stoops souped a little bit out of his comfort zone and made all the difference on homecoming. I think that it wasn't expected. I knew it would be a low-scoring game. I knew it would be a close game. I think that a lot of people are still reflective of, and we talked about this before going on. I still think people see the Kentucky Wildcats when it comes to football still a program how the Wildcats were 5 to 7 years ago. I don't think that people really do realize that their defensive front and what they did in the trenches. They are one of the best defenses in the country, and they definitely proved that in Oxford. And like I said, I wish that there was a highlight note, but again, there's a lot. Of course, when you lose, no fan wants to lose, especially in the SEC. When you're an Ole Miss Rebel, there's a lot of fans who are heartbroken, but at the same time, I see this as it's better an early loss. It's better to get things together, and I think that's kind of been the sentiment. Jackson Dart called a meeting with his offense, yesterday, kind of just talking about let's regroup, and I think that's just the mentality that it is in Oxford right now. The Rebels didn't want to lose that one; they should have kept it a lot closer. Lane Kiffin was talking about a disappointing loss, but at the end of the day, Kentucky came and they rolled out all the stops. Mark Stoops didn't reinvent the wheel. He still stayed close in his comfort zone, took a little bit of risk, but again, got to give credit to that Kentucky Wildcat defensive front for slowing down and making Jackson Darts and his receiving core that we've seen in the earlier in the 4 weeks really have trouble getting on a routine and getting back on SEC time.
No doubt about that. When you look at Kentucky, ever since Stoops built this program into a better situation there in Lexington, nobody is ever going to question Kentucky's toughness, their stoutness, their ability at the point of attack, their strength. So that's exactly how they played Georgia so close in a 13-12 game and held down the Bulldogs without a touchdown until deep into the fourth quarter. And they brought the same mentality here. They played, like you said, I think you said it perfectly, in terms of playing Stoops's game 2-1 in time of possession. So they held onto the ball, kept Jackson Dart in the offense for Ole Miss on the sideline. But when they had to break out of their comfort zone, when they had to break from their tendencies and shock Ole Miss, of course, they pulled the ultimate, that 4th and 7 play. And they just didn't go for a 4th and 7 like we're going to run a curl route or we're going to run a combination route underneath and try to just barely get the first down. They went for it. They went for a do or die play that would have ended the game on the other end almost certainly, with Ole Miss with a 1-score lead. Plus, they would have had the ball in the red zone already, but they went for it, and you have to really give it up, not just for the play call. The execution was right on. They obviously had the confidence that Brock Vandegrift was going to deliver a pass and Berrien Brown was going to bring it down, and that's exactly what happened.
Exactly. And I think too what we saw more in this week is Mark Stoops not reinventing the wheel. He really played to what Kentucky is strong at, and that's that nitty-gritty ball. And we talked about Berrien Brown. We talked about it last week on the show. Kentucky has several big top guys in that receiving core, but you got to give it to Dane Keys being out there all night. His dad was a former Kentucky defensive player. He was really a key component in making those drives stay alive. He had a really good connection. He was just all over that field. So I think Kentucky really was able to open up on the ground and control the time and be able to, I think, we heard a lot about Brown in previous weeks. He's an excellent receiver. We talked about him. But like I said, I think Kentucky opening up and stretching really gave him a player advantage on the offense to help get control of that ball. And another thing, like I was talking about, I think the biggest thing aside from the way they adjusted and they played to their strengths was I really do believe Kentucky is a great team. Ole Miss is still an elite team. You know, they just didn't play to their strengths and they didn't play the way they needed to play. But I do believe that what gave Kentucky the edge, aside from the playbook, aside from the adjustments, and we talked a little bit this about this before we went on the show and also a little bit last week, playing South Carolina, playing Georgia these last 2 weeks, getting ready, being on that SEC time, I really think helped Kentucky. Even though they lost on those games, we got to talk about it. They kept it close to Georgia. They were able to hang with South Carolina. And I think that getting them in that regimen, in that tempo. Whereas I feel like Ole Miss, the first 4 weeks, we've been in Margaritaville. You know, we've been playing teams again, nothing against those teams, nothing what they brought to us, but it's just a different type of play. And I really don't believe that Ole Miss was quite on SEC time. Again, I think we're more than ready, capable. You know, our defense, despite the way we played, just looked up on the PFF, weekly polling, we're still the number one defense in the country right now. I think it's 91.9 overall grade, 95.9 on our run defense, 86 on our pass rush. So despite the lack of showing against Kentucky and being able to stop them, our defense, there's still a lot of elite talent left in this Ole Miss, and I just really don't think that this game defines us. But I really do think that that edge of being able to be an SEC play a lot earlier and us being in non-conference play and not having a little bit of taste of SEC, regardless of who it is, didn't have that Rebels back in that mode, because I believe when the Rebels get in that tempo and that mode of how they have to play and adjust during SEC play when they play an SEC opponent, they don't make a lot of the mistakes that we saw from the penalties, from the secondary, especially in special teams where we've been a lot stronger on the season.
Lane Kiffin brought up the penalties. I'm going to say like the week before and the week before that and the week before that and the week before that. So it's not like this just jumped up. This was something that he said that they were looking to address all this time, but they still came back to bite Ole Miss at the wrong times with the penalties. And just to bring up a couple other points, and then we'll move on to South Carolina. And we do have a guest showing up here at some point. We got Will Gunter from 107.5, the early game in Columbia, South Carolina, joining us at some point. But just a couple things to get to here. So Trey Harris went off. The rest of the Ole Miss receiving core, though, he was the one option. He was the one guy that was making big plays. Now, Cade Prescorn, one of the best tight ends in the country, made a remarkable play on the final drive when Jackson Dart just slung a dart. Just a ridiculous
Yeah.
play in which Jackson Dart was sprinting to his right and had to go across field, hit Cade Prescorn, who just blocked out the defender, high point of the football. That was a huge play that got them into range. But just the thought that they probably have to spread the ball out a little bit more to be successful going forward.
No, I agree with you totally. I was really surprised. Trey Harris was key all night, clutch all night, but you can't help but think that Kentucky knew what Lane was going to call, as far as if Trey Harrison's been your guy, and you're going to know how to prepare that Kentucky defense. And again, we're not playing with the closed-minded, sleepwalking kind of Kentucky defense, one of the best in the country. So they knew what to expect. And I think that play calling was really surprising, that we didn't see much of what we saw in the first couple of weeks. Quite honestly, I thought we were going to see more from the tight ends in this one, because I feel like when you move a linebacker side to side, and with the kind of Kentucky defense brought, I thought we were going to see more. We were going to see more of Caden Prescorn in this matchup, just because you want to be able to push a defense like that. And I said being able to get a linebacker side to side makes it difficult, especially you see how Caden Prescorn, his size, his stature, and he's just always clutch. So that was another thing I was surprised. I was also surprised that we didn't utilize more of our depth. We have like I said, Trey Harris, heck of a game. But I mean, I was surprised that we didn't use more of our guys, more of our running backs. It's similar what we saw in first and second and third week. And granted, these are not the same, we're playing an SEC opponent, but I really think that had we changed it up more, using more of our go-to guys, because we have depth. One thing is no question, on offense, we can get you when you run an RPO, you can get them in the air, you can get them on the ground. So I was really surprised that Kiffin and Weiss didn't call that more. Again, coaches do what they feel is effective, but we saw that. I was just wondering, why the game plan decided to change was when we went against a stronger defense that we wouldn't try to change it up, go from using our key wideouts, going from using the running back, going from using the tight end. So that was really interesting to me. But again, like I said, one of the things you can't help but talk about that has been a thorn in Ole Miss Rebels side is those penalties. And I've said it and I'll say it again, as we get into SEC play, as we head into South Carolina, this may not be an evening game, but even a 2:30 game playing in South Carolina, that stadium, that atmosphere is difficult to play in. And the last thing you want to do is get the penalties, is not have your head in the game. And it's going to be difficult because this one's on the road, So I believe that the locker room, Lane Kiffin, always, along with his coaches, they no doubt always have a a hold on that. This is not final, but again, we're going to have to clean up the little things because the details are going to matter, especially with an extremely athletic team like South Carolina. Another defensive front, another secondary that has some explosive players. They're not going to bring the same depth that Kentucky brought, but they do bring another top-notch defense, especially on that defensive end. It's that former five-star Dylan Stewart. Coming out of high school, that he was athletic, freakish ability. He was known as Mr. Chaos, to turn the world upside down, and we've seen it. So I expect him to not do any different. I think, if anyone's going to try to ruin the Ole Miss party, it's going to be the Cox on the road, at home. So, like I said, penalties are going to be another thing, and there's going to be a lot of key games. But like I said, we'll go more into that. But I would like to see more of that switch up. We got immense depth, we got a lot of talent. Whether it's Ulysses Bentley, whether it's Parrish, whether we go into Caden Lee, just I would like to see it more changed up because I feel like if we have that depth and if you can constantly keep them on your toes and you can get them from the ground, you can get them from the air, it's a lot more difficult when you're facing another top defense like South Carolina.
I posted a video after the game, folks, if you want to check it out. I know it's been a while, but Ole Miss Kentucky analysis. I've only got one more point on this game, and we'll move on to South Carolina. Leanne and I always go around the SEC, so we'll do that as well. And she's always got something on the recruiting front, so we'll hit those points. And again, we hope to have Will Gunter here from 107.5 The Game in Columbia, South Carolina. So my last point, this is not a criticism of Lane Kiffin. This is basically to point out he had a decision to make. And I'll say, mildly surprised that he went the route of the field goal over going for it. But I got to say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, everybody is just kicking the field goal automatically and nobody even thinks about it because that's what you did for years and years and years without analytics. Then when analytics were introduced, I got to say that even 5 years ago, even though I was aware of the analytics, I didn't think about them to the extent that I do now. And I would have just been like, well, you kick the field goal, you're down 3, it's 4th down, you kick the field goal. But the side of the analytics say, okay, even though you're making a do or die play right now, and if you don't convert the 4th down, the game's over, you've lost. On the plus side, you're obviously keeping your chances alive to win the game. All you can do with the field goal, the best you can do is obviously, number one, tie the game. The best you can do is go into overtime, tie the game, go into overtime, and then it's still a 50-50 situation in overtime. You're still giving Kentucky like 50 seconds to drive as far as they need to win the game with a field goal. And so there's a lot of points to make on the side of the analytics. But again, I criticize coaches when I feel it's warranted, and I certainly do that on a regular basis. But that was not a call that I made like, oh, he made the wrong call, that was a bad call. I just think there was a decision, and you can make points on either side that I think are fair. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad decision Lane Kiffin made. It was just a difficult decision that he went one way and it didn't work out for him only because the kicker missed the kick.
No, exactly. And those are one of those tough decisions. One of the guys that he has one of the analysts he brought on, I believe it's former Chicago coach. So, another NFL mind that is who knows those type of different, those type of situations. And, I was really surprised that, he didn't go for it. But then again, and, in games like this where they're close, and it's been, that your team hasn't played to the strengths you want to try to go. I would have liked, and we talked about this before we went on the show. Caden Davis is an excellent kicker. He's has a high percentage of making his field goals. He's usually very clutch. And I would have liked to see that the Rebels put him in a better position as far as field position in order for him to make this kick, because I really do believe had he had better field position, that kick would have not been a problem for him, because you've seen him in past games. He's one of the best kickers that I've seen, in non-pressure situations. But I do believe that special teams, and that's another thing I'm going to bring up during, when we talk about South Carolina kicking. I'd like to see our kicking game get back into set, because again, it's going to be another close one with the way things are going. So I really do believe that special teams, especially with South Carolina, that's known to get most of its points defensively and on special teams, and then also the kicking game is, so it may come down to a field goal. I know as much as we want to score those touchdowns, I always say that you have to end every drive. You got to control the clock, you got to run the clock down, but every drive, no matter what happens, is you either have to convert and try to go from those third downs, which Ole Miss hasn't been strong on doing. They got to definitely be better at staying off the field, and those third and longs, they got to do something about that. But every drive has got to end in points. And I mean, this is not the only SEC match that we've seen field goal. I don't know what the numbers in the analytics are, but I feel like in this season alone, because the games have been so much closer, that field goals and special teams have been more impactful than we've seen it, as last year, especially with Ole Miss. I mean, in these close games, it's not so much about, making the touchdowns and getting in that red zone. It's in getting in field position. I've seen a lot more of that lately, that the kickers have come clutch in to try to keep these games close and put points on the board, because they've been so low scoring, because we've just seen so many more stout defensive, which, the SEC has been historically known for, is strong defenses. And then, you have Lane Kiffin and everybody roll out, and then we have these explosive offenses. But I think we're seeing back to that, that original trend of, the SEC being all about defense. And we're definitely we're seeing it from teams, like I said, unexpected teams like Kentucky, like what we're going to see in South Carolina. Now, South Carolina, again, like I said, might not be the same kind of elite defense that Kentucky brought, or even Ole Miss, but believe me, we cannot sleep on that, especially on the road. So excited to talk about it. But like I said, just moving forward, I know there's a lot of Ole Miss fans that are upset, and you want it, and you naturally are going to be upset. But at the end of the day, this is not a one and done. Ole Miss is still an elite team. They're still really balanced. But like I said, I just believe that we were still a little bit in Margaritaville. We're kind of just coasting. Not to say we didn't play hard, but I really do believe that Kentucky was already on SEC time. Heck, it didn't matter that they lost, but they were already in that mode and everything, Now I think that we've got back into SEC play. I think we're going to see Lane Kiffin and this group of Ole Miss Rebels play a lot differently on the road, because now they play with the chip on their shoulder, but now they realize, what's at stake.
I'll say this to Ole Miss fans, the ones that are being a little bit overly critical. I'll just say that I know you love your team. I know you're passionate, and that's one of the things that makes this sport so amazing, is that people are so incredibly passionate. And if you weren't passionate, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. We wouldn't be, they wouldn't have set an attendance record at the Kentucky game and packed out Vaught Hemingway Stadium. So we love the passion, and you should expect the best. And Ole Miss is loaded with talent, and Lane Kiffin's an exceptional coach. He's one of the 10 best coaches in America. All of those things are in place. So nobody's expecting you to be happy about the result, not to be disappointed, but don't buy too much into Vegas said it was a 17-point spread. We should win that with no problem. It's an easy game. No. None of those things are in place. I ran some numbers the other day, and I don't have them updated, but there were 18 double-digit upsets in college football. This is to Leanne's point that you just made about this season. There were 18 all of last season, double-digit upsets through week 2. I haven't even caught up to week 5. I got to go back and go through the last 3 weeks. There were already 8 double-digit upsets. And once you start to look at some of these games, These are not like Alabama Vandy games. These are games in which once you watch the game and see the competitiveness of the athletes in Kentucky, that Kentucky team, that roster that we watched on Saturday, there are a lot of NFL players on that roster. They are really loaded with talent. Now, they may not have certain pieces in play to compete for an SEC championship, but on any given day, they can compete with, as they did against Georgia, with anybody in the country. So it's not necessarily something where you can just, okay, on paper we should win this game and just assume things. So same type deal this week at South Carolina with a team where Ole Miss is supposed to go in there, win the game. They're a 9 or 10 point favorite. I didn't check the line lately, but let's expect a fight out of the Gamecocks on Saturday for sure, Leanne. And we have a super chat. Let me hit this before we keep going. Yay, this might be, I believe it is, unless I'm forgetting. This might be our first super chat since we started our show. We just started 4 shows ago, folks. So
Awesome.
we just got revved up here. So we hope you'll join us. And number one, blame me for being late today. That's all on me. Don't blame
Oh, it's
Leanne
all
at all.
right.
That's all on me. I forgot to send her the link. Like
We're
I thought
good.
so much that I had sent her the link that I didn't, but so we
We
will
were
get that
thinking
cleaned
like
up
3
quick.
weeks ahead. We were already thinking to LSU, you know?
There you go. And then secondly, we are now we hope to be, we'll see how things go, but we expect Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern time to be our spot. So we needed to start on Thursday, but we have found our home Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and we hope you will join us. Adam says this, here we go. The offensive game plan was entirely pedestrian. Dart looked lost. Kiffin was outcoached. The Grove deserves better. Wow, Adam's going after it here.
You know, it like I said, it was just I think that just Ole Miss was still stuck on, and I'm gonna say it, it's not that Ole Miss isn't a bad team. This is not a loss. It's gonna define them. I know there's a lot of people talking about, oh, this is Ole Miss doing Ole Miss things, but again, I think we're just still stuck in Margarita kind of Bill, and that's really like I said, nothing against Kentucky. Kentucky came to play. Mark Stoops went out of his comfort zone, and I really do believe that Kentucky was very underrated coming into this game. Again, I still believe they were still seeing Kentucky, because Kentucky, even on the road, Kentucky historically has not been a strong team, even when they've had strong teams in the past. But again, kudos to Stoops, what he's built here. And I think it's just like I said, an early loss, as a coach or different things, you take it all different. But sometimes I think, especially with the rebel mentality and what we see in the past, a loss doesn't equate a downfall. I really think that the loss coming later in the season would change the game for the way the Rebels play. I remember, a couple seasons back when there was that whole misstep of we were on that high, Lane possibly leaving to Auburn. We saw a shutdown on the team, and that was close to the end. We saw a team that went from being super great to elite to, not to even in SEC play, and then just a shutdown. But I think here, this team has learned to better control. Lane Kiffin and his staff have a better control of their locker room. They've built culture. I think there's consistency, like I said. Dart calling a meeting, taking reins of his offense, saying, "Hey, man, we didn't play the way I didn't play." I think everybody taking accountability. We're going to see a lot different ball club than we see, because I think now they're mentally checked in. I think that they're mentally ready. Not that they weren't the last 4 weeks, but again, when you're playing Georgia Southern, when you're playing Wake Forest, you prepare differently because those aren't teams that you see on a regular basis. Again, that's not an SEC team. So your mentality, your approach, your coaching, is a lot different. So of course Lane and his staff are going to have to prepare different, because Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, we're playing air raid one week, we're playing a lot of different things, and we don't see that much in the SEC. But I think now that this one loss is gonna catapult Ole Miss and this player and these boys, and I think that they're tuned in. You kind of see the sense in the locker room, what you've heard from the players. I think that they realize that they weren't focused on where they need to be, and they take accountability for it. No one's blaming the refs. No one's just blaming this. They know that they didn't play the way that they need to. And I think that the adjustments are going to be made, and we're going to see it in South Carolina. But again, penalties, details, the little things are going to matter in this game, and they're going to continue to matter. And I think that um, now that we're on SEC play, I really do believe that that's going to change the game. I think now that we're on SEC time, that the Rebels are going to come out, and I really do believe that we're going to be better prepared for what lies ahead. I mean, we're going to have to be because I mean, going to play in South Carolina, even though like I said, it's a 2:30 game. It's a tough atmosphere to play in. It's a tough stadium. It's noisy. It's crazy down there. And then next week we also have to go on the road to face the Bayou Bengals, LSU, arch rivalry, arch nemesis. We know that LSU is just waiting for us, hungry. Mike Tiger is waiting to feed on these rebels. And so, like I said, it's going to be a tough, tough 2 weeks. So if there was any time for us to be in a loss and to play with the chip on our shoulder, I think Lane Kiffin, likes things the way they are. And I think this team likes things the way they are. It's better a loss early than later in the season.
And not to get too far ahead, but that LSU game has been announced. So let's get caught up on that. So consider everybody, to Leanne's point, LSU's on a bye week. So they get the bye week heading into Ole Miss. They're at home. Game's been announced for 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central on ABC. So that will be a big one for Lane and the guys. Again, going to Death Valley. We know what happened last year. Ole Miss took them out like some crazy score, 55-48, something like that. I forget what the score was, but it was in the 50s, and 55-51 against Jaden Daniels and company. And to go back to your earlier point about that Ole Miss team, and I believe it would have been 2022, the 21 and 23 teams, sure, they took losses in SEC play and they bounced right back and completed great seasons. And that 22 team, I think, from a talent standpoint and from the way they were playing through the first 8 or 9 games, just as good. I think they were 8-1. They lost to Alabama in a close game, like a 24-20 game that they could have won. And then it just kind of went off the rails. They ended up losing a bowl game to Texas Tech, finished 8-5 that year. So that's what you want to avoid. Keep everybody focused, on point, on task from week to week.
No doubt. And I think even if we were able, I mean, you brought up the good point. And I believe is a Texas Bowl. I was there. Evie and I were there for that one. My goodness, it was so quiet up in the press box because the Ole Miss media crew is pretty small in numbers. And it's just like, we just had no words for it. But I mean, if they were able to go that record with a lot less depth than we do have now. That's my biggest point. Yeah, we have a loss right now, but I think we're coming into the later half of this season with so much more depth. Where we went and we got kings in the trenches on offense and defense. I think we're a lot more loaded. Like I said, I think it's just readjusting and cleaning up those things. And I think we're going to see it in South Carolina. I think the Rebels are ready. They're rowdy, but I think they're going to play with the chip on their shoulder because again, it's not how they wanted to play. And I think that this team, not that the past teams don't, but I think they're much more transparent and vocal. The coaches are, the players are, as far as taking accountability. It's not Lane doesn't sit there and blame his players. Lane, and the players don't sit there and make excuses. Are the coaches like, well, we've seen in other programs, a lot of programs are in turmoil. Not that saying that, there's not constructive criticism, but I won't mention any names, but I think we can all figure it out what other SEC programs and their head coaches, are out there, verbally talking about, well, if I would have had a quarterback that was this and that, save that for the locker room. Again, I'm not trying to criticize head coaches. I'm sure Lane and half his coaching staff are there and they're talking to these boys and they're telling them. But that's another big thing I think that helps this team bounce back is because they have a supportive coach in Lane Kiffin and his staff and the players. I feel like there's this camaraderie, but there's also this accountability, and I think now that the Rebels have that a lot more than we've seen in the past. It's not like this shutdown with them. They know what they didn't do. They know they didn't win, so now they got to go take care of business, and they got to do it on the road, and they got to do it in really 2 tough places. It's either do or die kind of thing, make or break. Pretty simple, straightforward.
Okay, Leanne, hide your eyes from the chat. Don't look at the chat too much. Don't look at the chat. Adam's on a roll here, so we'll keep going here to South Carolina. So yeah, 2:30 Central, 3:30 Eastern against South Carolina, and hopefully Will Gunter's going to stop by. I think everything's all set. I did not forget to give him the link, so I double checked, triple checked, and yes, he's got the link. So hopefully Will stop by. Will's been joining us for years and years and years, so he's a great source for South Carolina football. He's got an early show, morning show that has been going on for years and years and years. So he talks South Carolina football every day. so he knows his stuff about as well as anyone. But before we get there with Will, I'll say this about South Carolina. I did not expect this to be a very good football team. And then they came out the second
But
half against
before we get
Kentucky,
there with
and
Will,
that was after, let's see, they had played Old Dominion, who's not very good, only beat them by 4 points. That was an indication to me, okay, South Carolina is about as good as I thought they were going to be, which was not very. But Mark, you were wrong. The Kentucky game, they took them out in the second half and a 25-point win. And then I did not see any of that game. What I watched was that LSU game, and I saw that game start to finish. Great game, probably the most entertaining game of the week. And South Carolina jumped out, and by all indications, they should have won that game. They blew it about 18 different ways in the fourth quarter. Kyle Kennard, I'm going to ask Will about Kyle Kennard because he was making some of the best defensive line plays that I've seen off the edge this season. Unfortunately, he made two bad mistakes. One was a horse collar, one was a late hit, unnecessary roughness, and both were on pick sixes, two of them that negated pick sixes. South Carolina loses the game. They miss a kick at the gun against LSU, or they would have gone to overtime. Great football game, but South Carolina goes down to LSU. And then I thought, okay, this is a pretty good football team. Now they've taken care of business out of conference their last game out, and we'll see what South Carolina has in store. Now they've got some injury issues to deal with. Lenora Sellers, he went out with a sprained ankle in the game against LSU, or they probably would have won the game. Rocket Sanders, one of the best running backs in the SEC, used to be at Arkansas. He had a big day against LSU. He's been a bit injured. Was looking to get some updates with Will on those guys, but South Carolina's a pretty scary football team, kind of in the weeds under the radar.
Well, they really are, like I said, they don't bring a lot of crazy talent. They don't have a filled roster on both sides of the ball. But like I'm gonna say, and I've been saying week in and week out, this is one of the games that scares me the most because the talent that they do have, it's like you're getting two guys in one. They have just like this freakish ability. And I know you were mentioning about their quarterback coming back. I did see that it looks like he's going to be back for this game, Sellers. So maybe he can confirm that. What I like about this quarterback, that's also a game changer when you're without your starter. Not that you don't have good guys behind you, and not everybody is as fortunate as Ole Miss to have the depth at quarterback that they do. But having Sellers back, having your main guy, it helps get into the rhythm because at the end of the day, you can have elite defenses. We saw what Ole Miss did. They try at the very end to keep it on their defense, to try to get the defense to win the games. And defenses can do so much, but at the end of the day, you got to put points on the board. So I think Sellers being back is going to pose another threat. I look for the linebackers and things, especially the secondary, to really capitalize on that. Try to get South Carolina off on their footing. Shane Beamer plays Beamer ball. They don't call it Beamer ball for nothing. We went from Mark Stoops, who historically keeps it conservative, but when Shane Beamer's on the field, all bets are off because we know he's not afraid to call some crazy, thing kind of play. So he's going to definitely keep Ole Miss, on their feet when it comes to the play calling and what he calls. But having Sellers, if Sellers is indeed back, I think that that's going to be a strong footing. As a quarterback, I've watched a little bit of his film. He's got really great mobility. So again, if Ole Miss lets its guard down and Sellers, even if he is back healthy than he has been, that's going to be another thing of they're going to have to prepare for, because having a mobile quarterback, we saw very much against Kentucky. If South Carolina can keep it on the ground and not only keep it on the ground. I say when you run the ball, that's why I'm such a fan of it. Because it's like you're eating off time on the clock, you're controlling the ball, and most likely, if you can get into that red zone, you're going to put points on the board, and it's more than likely not going to be a field goal. It's going to be a touchdown. So, like I said, Sellers being such a mobile quarterback, that's another thing that Lane Kiffin and in this defense are going to have to prepare for. Again, we have, even with not as top showing, we still have a pretty high grade when it comes to the pass rush and the run defense, and I expect it to be on overdrive, and I do feel sorry for South Carolina because I think that the Rebels are really going to turn it up. But again, we're going to have to really watch if Sellers is back healthy and he's a mobile quarterback. It's going to be a difficult night if he can get the ball rolling early.
Please leave your comments and questions there in the chat. Leanne and I show up every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, talk Ole Miss football, and eventually we'll move this all over to the Ole Miss channel, but we want to obviously make everybody aware that we are here. So we're on the national channel and on the Ole Miss channel. So check out our Ole Miss channel. And of course, Leanne's work you can follow on X. Let's find there we go. It's right there on the banner.
There you go, right there.
There you go. So check out what Leanne has going on this week in regards to what are you working on this week?
Well, we're back. I'm actually packing bags, headed back to Houston. I'm going to be at another big game, Atascocita versus Summer Creek, another top matchup in Texas high school football nationally. I guess we can get to the recruiting news early. There's a lot of loaded players as expected when you go see high school football. A lot of them are getting into district play, but going to look at a running back, Carday Mack. If you watch his film, picking up, kid doesn't have an Ole Miss offer, but I'm sure here soon he might just have an Ole Miss offer. But another sensational running back, also plays quarterback. Like I said, so it's going to be an interesting week, and I always love to go see our next great running back. So hopefully that's kind of where we are. I'm sure I'll see a bunch of other players, but that's the name of the weekend. Again, recruiting season, we're already in October. So of course, official visits, we had Hayden Bradley. He was our lone official visit. I talked to, some of the kids because it's always hard to talk to a visitor, especially a potential recruit, especially a high caliber recruit. But a lot of them were, despite the way things didn't come, they always enjoy their time in Oxford. They really love what Coach Kiffin does as far as the culture, and all the other coaches. I was talking to Malachi Ziegler. He's a 2027 QB out of Benton, Louisiana. Him and his family were down there. I talked to him, because he's a quarterback. And he just had nothing but praise to say, it happens. But Jackson Dart kept his composure. He still tried to make things happen. And that's what you do as a quarterback. And, as a young kid, as a young high school kid that can see that, it's amazing to see because, like I said, it's difficult when you lose games because that also can be losses on the recruiting trail. You don't want it to be, but the last thing you want to do is lose at home in an electric atmosphere against a team that you're supposed to on paper win. But again, it's really impressive to see these young guys because despite the losses and what you see, they still are really impressed with the program. They know that an Ole Miss is not a one and done team. And I think a lot of them share that, some of them have come on multiple visits. They've been here during the summer, but they love Oxford. They love the atmosphere. But they really talked about, despite the loss, the ability for Jackson Dart to still keep his composure, to still keep pressing on. And again, if any kid knows it outside, the fan base, it's these kids because they have to do it at a different level. Most like I say every week, most of these kids Friday night, they're playing under the lights and they're getting in car. They're getting, their families are getting up early. They're bringing mom, grandma, aunts and uncles, to come see where they might play. And so, if any kid can understand, the difficulty of a loss, it's one thing when you're on a high, like Ole Miss has been undefeated, but it's how do you recoup from a loss? And like I said, a lot of the recruits were still impressed with what they saw. And they said that they'll definitely be back down the road. So it's always exciting to hear, a lot of good things going on in Oxford as far as recruiting.
Very good. We also take our trip around the SEC every week. So before we look forward to this week, I think we should talk about this Alabama-Georgia game because that was one for the ages. Alabama
Oh, goodness.
scored the first 28 points. In my mind, while everyone was making fun of Georgia on social media, what little I saw on social media, I was focused on just watching football. I was thinking about the Patriots-Falcons Super Bowl that was 28-3, and the Patriots came back and won just because even before Georgia scored a point, I was like, whoa. I sometimes remind people, have you not watched college football before? I'm not saying that Georgia's going to come back and win this game, but let's just let it breathe for a while because they're going to punch back. There is no doubt they've got too much pride, too much talent not to punch back. and then we got a classic. And to Alabama's credit, they took the punch back, and even after they gave up the lead, made those enormous plays. So we got to see like an instant classic in Tuscaloosa, and just Jalen Milroe, of course, dominating at times. And Carson Beck, to his credit, came back from a sluggish start, and he made plays on the other side, and it was a heck of a game.
No, it really was, and I think too, it's great to see Alabama still rise despite Nick Saban not being there. Their new head coach has done a fantastic job on the recruiting trail, man. They've racked up some guys. They've taken some Mississippi guys. They've taken Keelan Russell, outstanding quarterback who I'm actually going to see next week, who I believe the Ole Miss Rebels are still in the hunt and trying to knock on that door, but he's committed to Alabama along with Caleb Cunningham. That game was just like you said, it was one for the books. It reminded me of that vintage SEC that we so longed for. And like you said, when you talk about Georgia and when you talk about historically how they play, Kirby Smart's not going to let down. He may be down, but he's never out. But the same can be said about a team like Alabama. And I think that Alabama still kind of trying to have a little bit of proving ground because everybody still thinks that, you hear people say, well, Alabama's not going to be as good because Nick Saban's gone. And, it's a little bit of different. But what I notice a lot, which you see a little bit more, there's a lot of more carefreeness going on in Alabama. Not that the strict regiment wasn't working because Nick Saban had his way, but, this new era has also seen a lot of looseness with the players. And I think it's made them play differently. A credit to Jalen Milroe, like I said, still one of the most elite quarterbacks in his time right now and what he's done. Early on in the season, of course, the critics and skeptics were saying, he hasn't really found his footing. Well, yeah, if you were having to be the first week or second week, you might just not find your footing just yet. But I think that he's found his footing just fine. What I see about Georgia, they're still a top team. They're just on a down year, and that's going to happen. You can't always be at the top, even if you have elite players. But what I really see the difficulty with Georgia, especially on the offense, is they had Brock Bowers last year, and that was Carson Beck's go-to guy. It was his comfort zone. He even knew in tight situations, this is what is. I feel like that's what's been the difficulty. They don't have that offensive go-to guy that Beck has found that comfort zone with, and I really think that it's shown. And before in tight situations and difficult situations, that was his go-to guy. They were able to make plays, and I feel like Carson Beck doesn't have that guy this year. Now they do have a lot of weapons and they're loaded, but I don't feel there's that connection. I mean, there's very few connections like that you see, and one of the greatest QB wide receiver connections that I've seen within the past year, and I always see, and now we're seeing it again in Cincinnati. I was so excited. Was Joey Burrows and Lamar Chase when they were at LSU. There was just something about those two that there was just this connection, and no matter what the situation is, that those two, as long as they were in the zone, there was going to connect. And I felt that that's what Carson Beck and Bowers had last year. I don't think that Georgia has that this year. And I think that that's made it a little bit difficult for them to find their offensive stride like they normally do, because they've kind of carried their shoulders on that and bet on that. So, it's really interesting, the connection that people don't often talk about, because, even if you can have a lot of receivers that are key and clutch, quarterbacks always have their go-to guys. I mean, we saw it this week how instrumental Trey Harris was. Does that discredit any of the other guys? No, because they're just as good. But that there's that strong connection between Dart and Trey, or when Prescorn is, just because there's just that level that you can sense and you can see. So, that quarterback relationship with its receivers, it's a rarity when you can find that connection that, in any clutch situation. And I feel that's been really difficult for Georgia. And I think that's why we haven't seen the same explosiveness as we've seen in the year, because we don't have that same offensive power that I think Beck has found his comfort zone in. Nothing against Georgia, not discrediting what they do. They're still really good. But at the end of the day, Alabama and Jalen Milroe were just able to edge it out and play better ball.
Here's our SEC slate for Saturday. So we got Mizzou at Texas A&M. Texas A&M a slight favorite in this one. Missouri is obviously undefeated, but they've been scared by Boston College and Vandy in overtime, and Texas A&M's coming off a narrow win against Arkansas. Then we've got Auburn, Georgia, and of course we know that game went down the last couple minutes last year, but Auburn, it cannot get out of its own way. They had a collapse at home when they had a game in hand by 11 points in the fourth quarter, and Oklahoma could do nothing on offense, but they pulled out a couple miracles, one with a pick six, another with a long pass play to a guy that had not caught a pass, JJ Hester, since 2022. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, I did. I was watching the end of that game and then cut a video after and looked this guy up, and I'm like, and he only caught one pass in 2022. He caught 15 or 20 passes the year before, so legitimately he'd not caught anything other than one pass since 2021, and he catches a 65 yarder. Oklahoma wins the game. Uh, there we've got the game. We're of course all in on Ole Miss at South Carolina. Alabama, Vandy playing much better, but of course Alabama is a huge favorite in that game, as you would
Oh
expect.
yeah.
Tennessee, Arkansas playing close the last
Surprisingly,
2 years against
keeping
everyone.
it. Hmm.
Yeah, and
No,
Tennessee going on the road there, and then UCF in Florida. So what stands out to you?
well, that Auburn Georgia game is going to be interesting to watch. And, I think what's going on in Auburn, and I'm going to say it again, a lot of things that Auburn's just a perfect example here lately is how quickly that what's going on behind the scenes and off the field can quickly trickle into your team. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot with Auburn. Auburn just seems it reminds me similar to like, what happened when Ole Miss was in that later stage that I brought up earlier, when there was that talk of Lane Kiffin going to Auburn, in the middle of the Egg Bowl and all these type of things. And there was just this shutdown. And it wasn't so much that they didn't have playmakers, they didn't have things, but Auburn just seems to be going through a rough stage. And, Hugh Freeze he seems kind of out of character. I was talking with someone the other day and, we're talking about the boosters and pressures and things. And I've heard a lot of, backdoor talk about the boosters putting a lot of pressure on some of the things and the way things are being handled. And I don't think it's going the way that it should be going. And that's definitely, I feel, trickling down into their locker room. And I think Auburn and Hugh Freeze need to get a better control of what's going on. Like I said, Peyton Thorne really surprised me. I really thought that he was going to have a better footing when I heard him talk at SEC Media Days. Not only looking from his talent, and I know he hadn't been an Auburn long transfer, but when you hear the guy talk, he sounds like he's a son of a coach, or he should be coaching himself because the way he sees and narrows the game. But that's going to be an interesting game. I think it's going to be very difficult. I don't believe Auburn goes on the road and pulls up an upset. I think Georgia, especially, is going to be bitter coming off that loss to Alabama so close. They're playing at home, Athens, and all that. And I think that Auburn's just, unless they find some way, but I really believe that Auburn right now is got to get it together off the field if they really want what they have to salvage what they have, because it clearly shows that it's trickling in. And, and that's just really unfortunate to see when that a team, Hugh Freeze. You can say what you want about him here in Oxford and what is, but he's historically been able to make teams and is a really good coach when it comes, and he's got a good mind about it. But he's got to get hold of this team and his War Eagle, because right now it just seems that they're spinning and soaring into this thing. So for me, I think that game should be interesting. But another game that really interesting to me is number 4 Tennessee. We've seen the explosiveness. Let's talk about Nico. I mean, I can't say it again. I've watched that kid from high school all the way to now, and he's just commanding on that offense. What Heupel's done on the defense, kind of just they've always had elite playmakers, but now, I mean, Tennessee is just balling out there. But Arkansas, strangely for me, is one of those oddities, somewhat like Mizzou can be. Arkansas, despite its ups and downs, they play pretty good ball, and I really think that that's going to be an interesting game. I think that it's going to be a lot closer than what we anticipate, because I feel like Arkansas is going to play Tennessee in an interesting way. And I think we're expecting Tennessee to go out there, spread the ball, put firework numbers, similar to what we think of Ole Miss is doing, on the offense. But I feel like Tennessee is going to have a little bit of trouble being on the road of Arkansas. Arkansas is always historically a tough place to play. And I say that if you're an Ole Miss Rebel, you know how much Arkansas can be a difficult place to play. I mean, we were lucky when we got Chris Paul from Arkansas, another linebacker that has really showed out. But, Lane Kiffin a couple weeks ago alluded to that, when Paul was at Arkansas, that it was always difficult to play against him because Arkansas just always has these guys that can create chaos on defense, and they always make it really difficult to play. So that Tennessee Arkansas game is really going to be interesting for me. And I wouldn't be surprised if Arkansas keeps it close. And if they get their footing, that they upset Tennessee. That's going to be my bold prediction for the week.
Oh, okay. Uh, Arkansas beats Tennessee. All right. See, I know as soon as you said that, there are people that are going to either be watching in the future or in the chat right now that are like, what is she talking about? How's that going to happen? But again, I remind everyone, go from week to week in college football. There are going to be 2, 3, 4 games, something in that range this week that are going to blow everyone away, that are going to be games in which hardly anyone anticipated a certain outcome. So they happen every week, and they're out there. So I think that's a gutsy call. And Arkansas, again, even going back to last year, they went 4-8 last year. They took Alabama down to the final play of the game. They had a number of games similar. I watched them play Oklahoma State. They completely outplayed Oklahoma State and just made a lot of bad mistakes late in the game to blow that one. They lose to Texas A&M by 1 score. It's another 4-point loss. They go to Auburn. They win by 2 scores. Arkansas is a tough bunch, and that interesting. Yes, we are going to see games
I
like that.
just,
We just saw one last week
yeah.
with Ole Miss and Kentucky. There are more games coming, folks. I don't know where they are exactly, and that's the challenging thing to trying to predict games if you truly want to do it and not pick chalk all the time. So you can go the safe route and just go with the chalk all the time. But if you're truly looking for those upsets, they're going to be out there every week. And so, yeah, I can see it.
And they should, and you guys have, and if, like I said, for all those gamblers out there and all that, you guys have that great that your whole channel devoting to with your guys to betting and everything. So you guys got to make sure you subscribe to that and everything. Great picks out there and all that good stuff. Because, like I said, there's some people out there that don't just want to call the score of the game. They want to get those lines. They want to get those over and under. So I know that you guys have a great channel here on Voice of College Football for
Appreciate
that.
that. So, Leanne, how are your picks doing this year?
Yeah, they're doing okay. I've been, like I said, hot and cold. It just kind of depends. I think I went pretty well last week. I think I went like 4-1 and something. So yeah, like I said, it was okay. I was a little bit hotter last year than I was this year, but I think because I've been, like I said, a little bit more going on and haven't, because I'm one of those that I like to watch and I like to break down film, but you also when you're thinking, and I don't know how y'all are on the betting, but I always like to think about the outside factors. You talk about the weather. It's kind of like horse racing. You talk about the weather. You talk about all sorts of things because I mean, it's real. You can call the score of the game. You can say it's going to be this and that. But I mean, when you're talking about the lines and how they move, overs and unders, that's and I've hit really well on the Ole Miss over and under. As much as I want Ole Miss to be explosive, from week to week as things get challenging, that achieving that 58, 60 points. So I like to watch, I like to look at the film, I like to look at the breakdown, like to look at the weather. I like to look at about all the intangibles, that are outside the football field that people don't always think of, is there stuff going on in the locker room? Because all that plays in a role. Like I said, like probably why I wouldn't take Auburn this week, just because of all the outside intangible factors. So yeah, it just kind of depends, but I'm doing okay, but probably not as great as y'all do. That's why I said y'all got to check out the college football betting channel and subscribe to that and get some picks and put some money in your pocket.
Well, I don't know about that. I am frantically scurrying for your picks from last week. I got them. Let's check these out. Let's see what we got here. So this is, and you also get your NFL picks from Leanne as well. So if everybody can
Thanks.
see that, what do we have here? So BYU and 3.5.
Yeah,
Who
I'm
were they
trying to
playing last
remember.
week?
Yep.
I'm
I know.
losing.
Yeah,
I
Georgia
usually
Georgia
remember
Southern
everybody's
did.
games.
Oh, yeah, no, Georgia
Yeah.
Southern, Houston. Yeah, Houston got locked out on that one, and then Louisville, and then Michigan State. I'm trying. Yeah, I'm trying to remember
Oh,
all
well, you
those
got
because I
unlucky
usually
with
write them down.
Louisville. You
Yeah,
missed
I
Louisville by
did.
a half a point.
I know,
Uh,
I know. That's what I know. It was crazy, but And then my 2 lock games, Oklahoma State disappointed on that one, but Georgia Southern, I believe, did cover with that 3. So at least I got lock, and then of course the under 53 at Ole Miss. So yeah, not
Yes,
too
and I
bad
don't know
for
why
last
I'm
week.
blanking. I don't know why I'm blanking on the
Yeah, I
BYU
usually write
one.
them down, but it's like I've already moved on to the next week. I haven't even looked at the games because now, like I said, for me, it's like now this is just an interesting year where we expand playoff. And like I said, now we got a lot more teams playing different teams and not the ultimate powerhouses. It's not so easy, even some against my Ole Miss Rebels, like I said. I didn't take the line on that Kentucky Ole Miss game because I just wasn't convinced that we were going to be able to cover that point spread because I knew that two top defenses going in each other. And I knew Stoops made that adjustment that 16 points. I always say betting on lines is a lot different than the way that the games go. Not saying that the Rebels can't win it, but I mean, when you're talking about 16 points and you're playing two types of defenses is the way Kentucky and the Rebels play, and that that they're going to try to leave it to the ground game. I mean, ground games historically don't put up a lot of points because it's a back and forth. You're trying to take off time clock, keep it close. I mean, we saw how Kentucky played against Georgia. That was a low scoring game. So now I feel like as we get deeper into play, we're not going to see those outlandish numbers because we're not playing the non-conference teams. SEC teams going to get gritty, especially now. All these games are going to matter even now the way it plays out because like I said, especially for Ole Miss, I don't know how many more we can afford to lose if we're thinking about a conference, and we're thinking about how we're going to get seated in the thing. Because I mean, like I said, South Carolina game scares me. LSU scares me, not that we're not capable of winning. I don't think we're going to have a game plan, but like I said, there's a lot of factors and the special teams, the third downs. I mean, it's the little things that we got to clean up. I think Ole Miss, of course, on the bigger scale, they have a lot of things on handle. The offensive, defenses, offensive front, and that defensive front. Man, I mean, our offensive line didn't play the way they needed to play. But they still played. They still played strongly because I mean, like, again, you got to give Kentucky credit. Again, I was reading some of the comments and things of that, and Kentucky again. Kentucky's a lot better ball club than they have been. Stoops went out there and he's got some guys out there. And you can say about what you want, but Kentucky's a team that I've covered when there was no football there, into now. So again, yeah, it's a crazy time in college football. Like I said, we never know what we're gonna get.
I knew you get the BYU game right, but I just couldn't remember who they played because I know they're undefeated. So you took 6.5. So they obviously won the game. Yeah, they beat Baylor by 6. So you covered that
Yeah,
easily. So they beat Baylor by 6. I didn't really understand them being an underdog. So that was good of you to jump on that one because I was right there with you on thinking, why
yeah,
is
I
BYU
was
an
surprised,
underdog against
and I
Baylor?
think that's why I did too because I was surprised that when I saw that, and I get Baylor's at home, but man, Baylor's another team that's had a wishy washy season. They just and you hate that for David Honda because he's one of the best defensive minds in the country. But again, you can have the best coaches, you can have great players, but if it doesn't connect, it doesn't click, then you're going to be up a paddle and you ain't going to have no luck getting up that stream. And Baylor's in a tough spot. And I mean, when you think about it, the way the Big 12 is, that they shouldn't be in this difficult position. It's not like they're playing Texas or A&M anymore. They got a little bit of coaster schedule. So we'll see how it's going to be down in Waco.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Leanne and I get together every Wednesday for Ole Miss football talk. So be here next Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. If you just joined us during the later portion of the show, guess what you can do? You can just rewind and you can watch the entire show. Make sure you catch what you missed and catch Leanne on X and at the Rebel Walk as well. Leanne, appreciate you doing this as always, and we'll be back next week.
See you next week, and hopefully we'll have a lot better road win stuff to talk about. And yeah, like I said, it's going to be a good game. But last minute thoughts, just clean up those penalties, and then the secondary is going to have to come and is going to come to have to play. And and we're definitely going to have to work on keeping things on the field, keeping Jackson Dart fresh. But let's see some conversions this week. I want to see those third and longs and those third down conversions. Let's make some impact. And hey, it's not always great to go on the analytics, but when you have to, just go for it. Just go for it sometimes. Hotty toddy.